The Ruth Patrick Award honors an aquatic scientist whose research leads to the identification, analysis, or solution of critical environmental challenges. The 2021 Ruth Patrick Award is presented to Dr. Bo Gustafsson for his outstanding contributions to the understanding and management of eutrophication and hypoxia in the Baltic Sea. Dr. Gustafsson is currently director of the Baltic NEST Institute at Stockholm University's Baltic Sea Center in Sweden, as well as a faculty member with the University of Helsinki. Bo worked for much of his career on developing numerical models of large-scale biogeochemical cycles and ocean circulation. In recent years, Dr. Gustafsson has been focused on better understanding nutrient fluxes and potential climate change impacts in the Baltic Sea region. He was a co-author of the NEST model, which has been the foremost modeling tool for studying nutrient loading and impacts in the Baltic Sea. Dr. Gustafsson has also studied oxygen distributions, the carbonate system, and phosphorus and ironing cycle in the Baltic Sea in response to eutrophication. In addition to his numerous scientific contributions, Dr. Gustafsson has spent the past decade working with regional policymakers and the public to protect the Baltic Sea environment. His efforts have directly contributed to policies on nutrient reduction schemes adopted by the Baltic Marine Environment Protection Commission. Bo's work with the NEST model was critical to the development of the Baltic Sea Action Plan, which sets recommendations and objectives to restore the Baltic Sea environmental quality. In addition to working with policymakers and governmental entities on many other projects, Dr. Gustafsson can frequently be found on Swedish radio, TV, and in newspapers discussing the environmental threats facing the Baltic Sea region with the public. ASLO President Roxanne Moranger notes, Bo Gustafsson's outstanding work on regional scale nutrient modeling has been instrumental to the protection and restoration of the Baltic Sea. He is a true leader in the field and a brilliant example of how to work at the boundary of science and policy. Please join me in congratulating and welcoming our 2021 Ruth Patrick Awardee, Dr. Bo Gustafsson.
Thank you very much for those nice words, Amina. I guess I will start my little presentation that I will share with you today. So I will today talk a little bit about the Baltic Sea, the history of eutrophication and where we are today. It's of course a pity that we cannot meet in person. This is at least how I looked like a year ago on the last conference before COVID-19. First of all, I would like also to thank ASLO, of course, for this great honor of receiving for my great honor of receiving the Ruth Patrick Award. I was totally shocked by this award. And then there is, of course, all colleagues. I have not done this myself. It follows a long tradition, and also with colleagues around the Baltic. And of course, there's been significant investment in this work throughout the years from various funding agencies. So I will quickly talk a little bit about the Baltic Sea. First, some basic introduction. As an old oceanographer, I have to show a bathymetric map, of course. And the Baltic Sea is quite large. It's 420,000 square kilometers, this area, which is roughly twice the Great Lakes. And it receives a huge amount of fresh water, almost as much as Mississippi discharges. So there is a strong haline stratification, and it's very hampered water exchange, causing a permanent stratification. And there's also no tides. The watershed area is also pretty large. It's about half of the Mississippi watershed, for you who are more familiar with US conditions. We are pretty far north, so the polar circle is somewhere just above the northern Baltic Sea, and I am in Stockholm at about 60 degrees north. So the range, north-south range, is also reflected in the catchment area with mostly forested areas in the north and cultivated area in the south, but also the population is mainly in the south. I will go through somewhat the history of the eutrophication and development in the Baltic Sea region quickly. And I have made some simple graphs here just to illustrate the development. I plotted in this yellow, it's the phosphorus load. It could have been nitrogen loads, but primarily the development of loads. And in this pinkish curves, it's the winter phosphate concentration, also as an illustration on the development in the Baltic Sea. And we start off in 1950. After the Second World War, there was a major development in population increase. Population increased and primarily also urbanization, which was also partly due to the mechanization of agriculture, intensification of agriculture, and not the least, the fertilizer consumption increased enormously. This resulted already in the 50s and 60s that also the hypoxic areas, the red is hypoxic and black anoxic bottoms, increased in size. And before the World War II, they were very small, but now they were increasing in size. Still, there was not very much environmental awareness, but it started in the 60s, and eutrophication in lake was identified as a problem already in the 50s in some of the countries. And initial wastewater treatment plant construction started in the Western countries like Sweden and so on. When we came to the 80s, the situation kind of stabilized. The population and urbanization, we were in this modern society in all Baltic Sea countries. Still in the Western countries, even more wastewater treatment plant was constructed, but the agriculture was still also very intensive. In science, there were several projects, and it really became clear that eutrophication was a major driver of deterioration of the state of the Baltic Sea. In the environment, there was also an exceptionally long stagnation period without water exchange in the deep water that actually caused these anoxic areas, hypoxic and anoxic areas, to decrease in size during the 80s. So now we come to some really interesting developments, and you're all aware of, or at least I'm old enough to be aware of the difference when we made the first cruises I joined. It was still East Germany here, and we cruised very close to East Germany. We were afraid that we would be caught. But after the collapse of the Eastern Bloc and socialism, the picture changed completely, and the political situation of the Baltic Sea changed completely. And 14 years later or so, in 2004, actually all countries around the Baltic Sea, except Russia, is then EU members. This transition also, together with also global economic growth in around 2000, but especially in this region, there was lots of hope and economic growth and optimism in these societies, and also a good measure of political stability. At the same time, the Baltic Sea didn't look so good. It started, as I said, late with this stagnation period time with pretty good conditions, and then it deteriorated more and more and more. And eventually in 2005, there was this massive cyanobacteria bloom. So what happened was that we had this optimism among the politicians, and there was also so that wanted to really sort out these problems, and this bloom, I think that was the thing that really kicked that now we have to do something. So then the work with the Baltic Sea Action Plan started in HELCOM with the aim of eliminating eutrophication in the Baltic Sea. So the objectives are still very, very ambitious. And they are stated like this. So the first Baltic Sea Action Plan, or the Baltic Sea Action Plan, came in 2007. And then we have done revisionary work in 2013, and now there is an update going on. But going back to 2007, it was also so that in 2006, we had completed a series of projects, or a major project called MARED, and in which we developed this decision support tool, NEST. So we actually had a decision support tool that really aimed towards large-scale eutrophication issues. And at the same time, it was this demand for action on eutrophication. So how does it work? Well, first, we address that we need to translate these objectives into some numerical values that we can work with, and that we call targets, and nowadays often thresholds. I mean, what is the measurable values that correspond to the state we wish to have? And from those, when we have those values, we can use our models to find what we in the HELCOM world call maximum allowable inputs, or sustainable load, I sometimes say, because it sounds more like in other fields. But the loads that the Baltic Sea basically can cope with and reach these targets. And finally, there is a stage where we allocate nutrient load reductions to the countries, and they undertake to or commit to do it. Of course, we don't exactly decide the principles of this sharing. That has to be a political negotiation. So what has happened after these agreements in 2007 and 2013? So there's been a continued very large investment in measures, and nutrient loads are really, especially for phosphorus loads, are, we think, at about the level of the 50s. So it's been a real success in decreasing nutrient loads to the Baltic Sea. However, as we see on the concentration here, it's about the same level as it has been for decades. And these past few years, we have had actually the worst hypoxia ever, largest hypoxic area. And the bloom, I think it was last year, was the most extensive we ever seen. This is, of course, causes a lot of frustration and despair. And by the way, it's cyanobacteria you see on the picture here, which means that our role here is more important, perhaps more important than ever. I mean, how do we explain this to people that it is like this? Because we understand basically why it is like this. One thing we do is that we make model scenarios, and one scenario I did mostly for illustration purposes was this one, where we say that, well, if we hadn't done anything, if we continue these loads up here in the 80s, how would it look like today? And then here I continue to just use phosphate concentration as an indicator of the case here. And you see that, well, it will rather soon have been higher concentration, and then today it would be very much higher, almost twice as high. So we would have much higher winter nutrient concentration, higher primary production by 50%, and it would have been a disaster. And not like in this picture that we have some cyanobacteria bloom, but we also have blue water over there. Another scenario we do, of course, is to look into the future. And how far have we come with the present day loads? Well, in the future, concentrations will go down. We have to do more to reach our targets, but it's going down. So finally, I wanted just to share some of my thoughts in kind of the spirit of Ruth Patrick, of my experience working in particular in this HELCOM community and discussing these reduction targets and so on. So I think one very important key element is that you have to do good science, but you have also to really cooperate and get acceptance for what you do. If you have very controversial advice, you should still, of course, communicate it, but you would likely not get an impact if you haven't really reached a more or less consensus in the scientific community. It's important to use the basic and apply sciences. I wrote it in bracket here. I mean, we need to have the most recent research, new knowledge integrated, but at the same time, we need to make relevant science that for the relevant questions, of course. So we really need also to be applied. Quantify problem and solution. I think this, it's quite often we quantify problem, but sometimes I think we forget to quantify the solution, to advise what could be done about something. It's much more easy just to say this is a problem. You need a true involvement with your stakeholders. I mean, you need to both understand the problems, of course, and the questions and so on, but you also need to acquire their trust. And then in the case of HELCOM, this Baltic Nest Institute, which was formed then in connection with the Baltic Sea Action Plan in 2007, has been extremely important since it's an independent institute, so to say. It's independent from countries. So we have no stake when the countries are doing the negotiations. And in my experience, especially with these HELCOM processes, that at some point you might find that the politicians do something that deviates a bit from the science towards the end. But I mean, they have other considerations as well in the political negotiations than being strictly scientific. That was my presentation. So thank you. And thanks once again for this fantastic prize.
Thank you so very much. We appreciate the presentation. A question in the chat, and other people, please feel free to add questions to the chat. First, there's a note, excellent talk and congratulations. What fraction of the eutrophication traces to animal agriculture? And then second, would altering human diets to plant-based restore the Baltic?
Yeah, this is a complex question, but it's very interesting. First of all, the spatial distribution of intensive animal production is quite, so there's a lot of animals, especially in the south. And this has, we have documented that there is a problem if you don't take care of the manure. And the problem with intensive animal production is that you tend to get more manure than you have a possibility to get rid of by spreading on field and taking care of. So I wouldn't dare to say a number, but however, there is an ongoing discussion on the diet. And that is not so simple, because it depends on, when you just talk about eutrophication, it depends completely on where the animal come from. We have also, especially here in Sweden, which is not so intensely agricultural, we have large areas where we really need grazing animals for our biodiversity. So if you eat that meat, you don't harm the Baltic Sea.
Great. Thank you so very much. There are additional questions in the chat that hopefully you can, I can send to you and you can follow up on after the plenary, because so thank you so very much.
Thank you again. Thank you.